Welcome to Passions Illustrated. Before starting the video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe.
The sound of the martini glass shattering against the wall of the elegant Manhattan apartment echoed through the room, causing Adrian Mitchell to frown as he watched his younger sister have one of her famous fits of rage. "You can't be serious, Adrian. Accepting an arranged marriage in the middle of 2024. That's ridiculous." Madison gesticulated frantically, her Christian Louboutin heels marking the hardwood floor as she paced back and forth. Adrian adjusted the navy blue tie of his impeccable white dress shirt, maintaining the composure that was his trademark as CEO of Mitchell Enterprises. "What do you suggest then, Mad? That I keep watching Catherine post pictures with her ex-boyfriend in every restaurant in New York?" The mention of Catherine's name made Madison roll her eyes dramatically. Her ex-sister-in-law had become the talk of New York high society in recent weeks, ever since she had started to be seen publicly with her college ex just 2 months after breaking off a 3-year engagement with Adrian. But agreeing to marry Stephanie Bennett just because your parents are friends, that's crazy. Madison collapsed on the Italian leather sofa, defeated. The truth was that Adrian had already considered all the implications of that decision. At 32, he was respected in the corporate world, had a considerable fortune, and a busy social life. What he didn't have was someone to share it all with, not. Since Catherine decided that her crush on her ex-boyfriend from Columbia University was stronger than 3 years of history with him. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a message from Stephanie. "Dinner at 8. We need to discuss some details." Stephanie Bennett. Adrian had known her since childhood when their families spent summers in Southampton. She had become a renowned plastic surgeon in Boston, and like him carried the weight of family expectations on her shoulders. The marriage arrangement had been suggested by their mothers during a charity lunch, and surprisingly both he and Stephanie saw a certain logic in it. "I'm meeting Stephanie for dinner tonight," Adrian announced, picking up his blazer. "Let's establish some parameters for this arrangement." Madison stood up abruptly. "Agreement? Is that what you're going to call your wedding?" "That's exactly what it is, Mad. 2 mature adults deciding to unite their lives in a practical and rational way." Le Bernardin restaurant was relatively quiet for a Thursday evening. Stephanie was already waiting for him, elegant in a black dress that highlighted her naturally graceful posture. Her green eyes met his as soon as Adrian crossed the room, and a small smile curved her lips. "You're late," she commented when he sat down. "I had to calm Madison down. She's not very enthusiastic about our decision." Stephanie shrugged, a surprisingly casual gesture for someone always so composed. "Charlotte's not jumping for joy either. She says I'm throwing away my chance of finding true love." "And what do you think of that?" Adrian asked, genuinely curious. "I think true love is overrated. Look at you and Catherine. Or my parents who married for love and now can barely stay in the same room." The waiter poured wine and they silently toasted his pragmatic decision. The conversation flowed naturally as they discussed practical details, housing his apartment in Manhattan, work. She would be moving her practice from Boston, and, of course, the prenuptial agreement. It was when Stephanie mentioned her summer vacation in Southampton that something subtly changed. "Remember that time you pushed me into the pool and I didn't speak to you for a week?" Adrian laughed, remembering the incident. "You were wearing your favorite dress. I've never seen a 12-year-old so angry." "It was Valentino," Stephanie protested, but she was laughing too. For a moment, they were those carefree children again, not 2 adults negotiating a wedding as if it were a corporate merger. Dinner went on for hours, shared memories blending into plans for the future. When they finally left the restaurant, the spring evening was surprisingly pleasant by New York standards. "Do you want to go for a walk?" Adrian suggested, surprising himself. Stephanie hesitated for a moment before agreeing. They walked side by side down Fifth Avenue, the silence between them comfortable in a way Adrian hadn't expected. "This could work, you know," Stephanie said softly. "We know each other, we respect each other. It's more than many couples have." Adrian stopped walking, turning to look at her. Under the light of the street lamps, her eyes seemed greener than usual, and there was a vulnerability in her expression that he had never noticed before. Yes, it could work, he agreed, realizing that he really believed it. That evening, after dropping Stephanie off at her hotel, Adrian spent a long time on the balcony of his apartment watching the city lights. He thought about Catherine and how his heart no longer ached so much at the thought of her. He thought of Stephanie and how different she seemed now that he saw her not just as the daughter of his parents' friends but as his future wife. Maybe Madison was wrong. Maybe an arranged marriage wasn't so absurd after all. After all, what was love if not? A daily decision to be by someone's side to build something together. Her phone vibrated again. Another message from Stephanie. "Thanks for dinner, and for not pushing me into any pools this time." Adrian smiled, typing a reply. "The night is still young and there's a pool on the terrace of your hotel. Don't even think about it, Mitchell. That dress is Valentino too." For the first time in weeks, Adrian went to sleep with a smile on his face, thinking that sometimes the best plans are the ones that life makes for us. The news of the arranged marriage between Adrian Mitchell and Stephanie Bennett spread through Manhattan high society like wildfire through dry straw. The New York Post had already published a speculative article about the deal of the year, as they were calling it, and the messages kept arriving on both of their cell phones. Another concerned message from Aunt Margaret, Stephanie, sighed, showing Adrian her cell phone as they ate breakfast in the Mercer kitchen. It was Sunday, and they had decided to start appearing publicly together to get society used to the idea. "She thinks I'm making a terrible mistake." Adrian smiled from behind his coffee cup. "Well, at least your aunt is concerned about your well-being. The company's board of directors is more interested in whether our marriage will affect the merger with Bennett Industries." "Of course it is," Stephanie rolled her eyes, "because God forbid two people get married without there being some corporate benefit involved." The irony in her voice made Adrian take a closer look at her. Stephanie had always been known for her pragmatic attitude, but there had been something different about her behavior in recent weeks. Little moments of vulnerability that he had never noticed before were beginning to peek through her perfectly composed facade. "Steph," he began, choosing his words carefully, "are you sure you want to go through with this? We can still." "Don't you dare finish that sentence, Adrian Mitchell," she interrupted him, her green eyes fixed on his. "I'm not Catherine. I'm not going to change my mind at the last minute." The mention of Catherine still caused a slight discomfort, but not for the reason everyone imagined. The truth was that Adrian felt more ashamed than hurt, ashamed that he hadn't realized. Before that, his previous relationship was more about appearances than true feelings. Adrian's cell phone vibrated, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Madison. "Family dinner tonight. Mom insists on meeting her fiancé properly. Bring Stephanie at 7. "Looks like it's time for the official debriefing," he showed the message to Stephanie. To his surprise, she smiled. "Good. It's about time we faced it. Besides, your mother always liked me." "Yes, when you were her best friend's daughter. Now you're the woman who's going to marry her favorite son." "Only child," Stephanie corrected. Madison would disagree with that. The rest of the day passed quickly as they finalized a few practical details. Stephanie had found a temporary apartment in Manhattan to stay in during the transition from her Boston practice, and Adrian helped her review some contracts with her new partners in New York. At 6:45 sharp, their car pulled up in front of the Mitchells' mansion on the Upper East Side. Stephanie nervously adjusted her emerald green dress, a choice that Adrian noticed matched her eyes perfectly. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "As I'll ever be," she replied, wrapping her arm around his. The Mitchell mansion was as bright and welcoming as ever, but there was a tension in the air that was almost palpable. Eleanor Mitchell greeted them in the entrance hall, her impeccable posture masking any emotion she might have been feeling. "Stephanie, darling!" Eleanor hugged her formally but affectionately. "How wonderful to have you here, in these new circumstances." Dinner was served in the main dining room where Madison was already waiting for them along with her husband, James. The conversation flowed surprisingly well, with Stephanie demonstrating her knowledge of art, one of Eleanor's favorite hobbies, and politics, James's passion. It was during dessert that Eleanor finally approached the elephant in the room. "So, dears, have you decided on a date yet?" "Mom," Madison began in a warning tone. "What I can't ask about my own son's wedding." "We're thinking October," Stephanie replied calmly. "A small, intimate wedding." Eleanor almost choked on her wine. "Small. But darling, you're the heirs to two of the most important families in New York." "That's exactly why," Adrian intervened, placing his hand on Stephanie's in an instinctive gesture of support. "We want something meaningful, not a social spectacle." The touch of their hands caused an unexpected electric current between them. Stephanie looked at Adrian in surprise, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. There was something in her eyes, something he had never noticed before. "Well," Eleanor's voice cut through the moment, "I suppose you're grown up enough to make your own decisions, even if they are unconventional." Later, as they were leaving the mansion, a fine rain began to fall over Manhattan. Adrian held the umbrella over them as they walked to the car. "You looked amazing in there," he commented. "Years of practice at social dinners." Stephanie shrugged, but there was a smile on her lips. "Besides, your mother isn't as scary as she looks." "Don't tell her that. She's worked hard to cultivate that image." They laughed together, and again Adrian felt that inexplicable connection. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced before, deeper, more real somehow. "Do you want to stop by Bemelman's bar for a drink?" he suggested impulsively. "I think we deserve it after that dinner." Stephanie hesitated for a moment, and Adrian was afraid he had crossed some invisible boundary of their agreement. But then she smiled that smile that was beginning to make his heart beat a little faster. "Only if you promise not to mention any more weddings, families, or corporate mergers for the rest of the evening." "Deal. We can talk about how you used to have a crush on me when we were 15. Stephanie blushed violently. "Who told you that?" "Madison. Apparently you weren't as discreet as you thought." Her laughter echoed down the wet street, and Adrian realized that for the first time since they'd made this deal, he wasn't thinking of it as an arrangement of convenience. It was beginning to look more like destiny. The news of Adrian Mitchell's marriage to Stephanie Bennett had become the hot topic in Manhattan social circles, but it was the photo of them at Bemelman's bar, captured by a paparazzi and published on page 6, that really set social media alight. In the image, Stephanie was laughing at something Adrian had said, her face lighting up in a way that suggested much more than a simple marriage agreement. "You look happy." Charlotte, Stephanie's best friend, commented during their weekly lunch at Le Coucou. Her tone made it clear that happy wasn't exactly the word she wanted to use. Stephanie fiddled with her salad, avoiding her friend's inquisitive gaze. "It's complicated, Char." "How complicated are you developing real feelings for your fiancé of convenience?" Before Stephanie could reply, her phone vibrated with a message from Adrian. "Emergency meeting with the wedding planners. Apparently, October is very close, and your mother is having a nervous breakdown about the flowers that will be in season." An involuntary smile appeared on his lips, which did not go unnoticed by Charlotte. "Oh my God, you are!" Charlotte exclaimed, almost knocking over her champagne. "You're in love with him." "Don't be ridiculous," Stephanie protested, but her flushed face betrayed her. "It's just, Adrian is different from what I imagined. He's thoughtful funny when he's not trying to be the perfect CEO, and completely heartbroken about his ex," Charlotte added. "Don't forget that, Steph." The comment hit Stephanie like a bucket of cold water. She knew Charlotte was right. She'd seen Adrian's expression every time Catherine's name was mentioned, the way his shoulders tensed when they passed places he frequented with her. The afternoon found Stephanie in Adrian's office at Mitchell Enterprises discussing the final details of the wedding with Eleanor Mitchell and her own mother, Patricia Bennett. The two women debated animatedly about floral arrangements and guest lists while Stephanie watched Adrian through the glass walls of her living room conducting a video conference. Darling, are you listening to me? Patricia caught her eye. I was saying that we need to arrange a fitting for the dress next week. Actually, Stephanie took a deep breath. I've already chosen my dress. Both Eleanor and Patricia stared at her as if she had just announced that she planned to get married in jeans. But what about the fittings, the photos, the tradition? Eleanor looked genuinely upset. It's a Vera Wang, Stephanie explained softly, and it's perfect just the way it is. Adrian chose that moment to enter the room, loosening his tie with a weary sigh. Any progress with the preparations? Your fiancé has decided that you don't need to follow any traditions, Eleanor informed him, her voice laced with disapproval. Adrian looked at Stephanie, and something in his gaze made her hold her breath. Well, considering that this whole wedding is rather non-traditional, I think it's appropriate. Later, when the mothers finally left Adrian and Stephanie remained in the conference room surrounded by sample invitations and flower catalogs. Sorry about that, he said, gesturing at the mess left by the meeting. They can be a bit intense, Stephanie added, smiling. It's all right. Actually, there's something I need to tell you. Adrian approached, taking a seat on the edge of the table next to her. It sounds serious. It's about Catherine. Stephanie began noticing how he tensed when he heard the name. She came to see me yesterday. The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian remained completely still, his eyes fixed on some distant point through the windows that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. What did she want? His voice was controlled, but Stephanie could feel the storm beneath the surface. To tell you that you're making a mistake, that this marriage is a reaction to what happened between you and that you'll regret it. Adrian laughed, but there was no humor in his sound. Classic Catherine, always thinking that everything revolves around her. And she's right, Stephanie asked, her voice almost a whisper. He finally looked at her, really looked, and Stephanie felt her heart race at the intensity of his gaze. No, Adrian replied, his voice firm. This has nothing to do with Catherine. It has to do with both of us, with the choices we've made. And what choices are those exactly, Adrian? Because sometimes I'm not sure we're on the same page. He stood up, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration. I don't know either, Steph. All I know is that for the last few weeks, every time something important happens in my life, you're the first person I want to call. That when I wake up in the morning, I'm already thinking about what funny message I'm going to send you to start your day. That when we're at a boring social event, I look across the room for you because I know you'll understand exactly what I'm thinking. Stephanie's heart was pounding so hard that she was sure he could hear it. Adrian. And I know that wasn't part of the deal, he continued, now pacing the room. It was supposed to be simple, practical. But maybe. Adrian's phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Madison, something about a family emergency. When he hung up, the moment had passed, leaving only unanswered questions and unspoken truths hanging in the air between them. I have to go, he said, picking up his jacket. Shall we have dinner tomorrow? Stephanie nodded, unable to trust her voice at the moment. As she watched him leave, she realized that Charlotte was wrong. The problem wasn't that she was developing feelings for Adrian. The problem was that those feelings had always been there ever since those summers in Southampton, just waiting for the right moment to blossom. Madison's call wasn't exactly about a family emergency, at least not in the traditional sense. Catherine had shown up at her house visibly upset after a few glasses of wine, demanding to speak to Adrian. You can't just show up like that, Madison tried to argue as Adrian entered her Upper West Side penthouse. You broke up months ago. Catherine was sitting on the sofa, her slightly creased designer dress and perfectly groomed hair contrasting with her troubled expression. When she saw Adrian, her eyes went wide. You can't marry her, Catherine declared, standing up groggily. It's a mistake. Adrian felt a fatigue that had nothing to do with the long day at work. Madison, can you give us a moment? His sister hesitated, but eventually nodded and left the room, not before casting a warning glance at Catherine. Why are you doing this? Catherine asked as soon as they were alone. Is it because of me? to make me jealous?" "It's not all about you, Catherine," Adrian replied, his voice surprisingly calm. "In fact, this is probably the first decision in my life that has absolutely nothing to do with you." But it's Stephanie. You hardly know her." Adrian couldn't hold back an ironic laugh. "I've known her for 20 years. I knew her first love disappointment, her fear of thunder, her determination to become a doctor when everyone said she should follow the family business. I know that she drinks coffee with almond milk not because it's a fad, but because she discovered she was lactose intolerant when she was 16. I know she still keeps the first scalpel she got from her father." Catherine stared at him, dumbfounded. You're in love with her." It wasn't a question, and the realization hit Adrian like a bolt of lightning. All those little memories, moments, and details he had about Stephanie weren't just the result of years of living together. It was something deeper, something that had perhaps always been there waiting for the right moment to be recognized. "Yes," he replied, the truth of that single word freeing him from a weight he didn't even know he was carrying. "I'm in love with her." On the other side of town, Stephanie was in her temporary apartment reviewing documents for the transfer of her clinic when her cell phone rang. It was Charlotte. "I just saw Catherine leaving Madison Mitchell's house completely upset," her friend shot back, without even saying hello. "What's going on?" Stephanie felt her stomach turn. "I don't know, Char. Adrian had to rush over there earlier." "Steph," Charlotte hesitated. "Maybe it's time you were honest with him. About everything." "You mean about how I've secretly spent the last 15 years in love with him?" Stephanie laughed humorlessly. "About how I accepted this arrangement, not because it was practical, but because it was my only chance of having him in my life." "Exactly about that." Stephanie walked over to the window of her apartment, looking out at the lights of Manhattan. "I can't, Char. If he finds out, he'll think I manipulated this whole situation. Or maybe he needs to know the truth to realize his own feelings." The sound of the doorbell interrupted the conversation. Stephanie froze as she saw Adrian through the peephole looking agitated. "I have to go," she whispered to Charlotte before hanging up. When she opened the door, Adrian walked in like a contained storm. There was something different about him, an energy she had never seen before. "Catherine showed up at Madison's house," he began without preamble. "I heard," Stephanie replied softly. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." He took a few steps towards her. "Actually, I've never been better. Because I finally understood something." Stephanie's heart began to beat faster. And what would that be? That this arranged marriage was the best thing that could have happened to me. Not because it's convenient or because it makes sense for our families, but because it made me see what was right in front of me all along. "Adrian!" Stephanie could hardly breathe. "I love you, Stephanie. Probably for longer than I realized, but I was too stupid to see it, and I don't want this to be a deal anymore. I want it to be real." The tears Stephanie had been holding back began to fall. "There's something you need to know," she began, her voice trembling. "I love you too. I always have. Ever since those summers in Southampton, every moment we spent together. That's why I accepted this arrangement, not because it was practical, but because it was you." Adrian crossed the distance between them in 2 steps, taking her face in his hands. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Because you were with Catherine? Because you seemed happy? Because—" He interrupted her with a kiss unlike any other they had ever shared during their public appearances. This one was real deep, loaded with years of unspoken feelings and wasted moments. When they finally broke apart, they were both panting. "I think we need to rewrite our agreement," Adrian murmured against her lips. Stephanie smiled through her tears. "How about we start with, once upon a time, there were 2 idiots who needed an arranged marriage to realize they were made for each other." "Perfect," Adrian laughed, pulling her into another kiss. "Absolutely perfect." The news that the Mitchell-Bennetts' arranged marriage had turned into a real love story spread quickly through Manhattan's social circles. Messages of genuine congratulations began to replace skeptical comments, especially after Page 6 published photos of the couple in an intimate moment in Central Park, completely oblivious to the world around them. "You guys are nauseating," Madison declared during Sunday brunch at Adrian's penthouse, watching as her brother unconsciously adjusted the blanket around Stephanie's shoulders when a stronger breeze blew across the terrace. "I agree," Charlotte added, hiding a smile behind her mimosa. "I never thought I'd live to see Stephanie Bennett with that passionate teenage gleam in her eyes." "As if you and James weren't the same in the beginning," Stephanie retorted, referring to Madison's husband. "In the beginning, they're still like that," Adrian teased, earning an olive thrown in his direction by his sister. The moment of levity was interrupted when Adrian's phone rang. His face changed subtly when he saw the number, and Stephanie immediately knew who it was. "Mr. Bennett." Adrian answered, his voice taking on the professional tone he used in important meetings. "Yes, I understand. I'll be there in an hour." When he hung up, the relaxed atmosphere had dissipated. "Your father wants to see me at the office. Today. Sunday." Stephanie felt her stomach tighten. Richard Bennett wasn't known for holding meetings at weekends unless something very serious was going on. "Do you want me to go with you?" she offered, but Adrian shook his head. "I'd better face it alone. Besides, you've got that video conference with the Boston team about the clinic transfer." An hour later, Adrian entered Richard Bennett's imposing office at the top of Bennett Tower. The family patriarch was standing by the window gazing out over Manhattan with a glass of whiskey in his hand, an unusual habit for a Sunday morning. "Sit down, Adrian," Richard commanded without turning around. "I imagine you know why I called you here." "Actually, I don't, sir." Richard finally turned his eyes so like Stephanie's, studying Adrian intently. "I had an interesting visitor last night, Catherine Morton." Adrian felt his jaw tighten but kept his expression neutral. "And what did she want?" "To tell me a fascinating story about how you're using my daughter to make her jealous." Richard took a sip of his whiskey. "Normally, I wouldn't listen to spiteful ex-girlfriends, but this got me thinking. How much of this relationship with Stephanie is real, and how much is elaborate revenge? With all due respect, Mr. Bennett." Adrian stood up, his voice controlled but firm. "What I feel for your daughter has nothing to do with Catherine. In fact, thanks to this arrangement our families have worked out, I've finally been able to see what's been in front of me all this time. And what would that be? That I love Stephanie. Not because of an agreement not to please our families, but because she's the most extraordinary person I've ever met. And if you think this is part of some revenge plot, then perhaps you don't know your daughter as well as you think." A heavy silence filled the room. Richard studied Adrian for a long moment before placing his glass on the table. "Do you know why I agreed to this arrangement, Adrian?" he asked, his voice softer. "Because 15 years ago, I watched my 16-year-old daughter crying in the garden of our house in Southampton after seeing him with his first girlfriend. And yet, for all those years, she never stopped talking about you with that special sparkle in her eyes." Adrian felt his heart squeeze at the revelation. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know. Stephanie has always been very good at hiding her feelings. But a father knows." Richard moved closer, putting a hand on Adrian's shoulder. "When your mother suggested this arrangement, I saw an opportunity. Not for a corporate merger or a family alliance, but for my daughter to finally have a chance with the man she's always loved." Richard's words hit Adrian with full force. All those years, all those shared moments. How could he have been so blind? "She deserves to know that," Adrian finally said. "The whole truth." Richard nodded. "Yes, she does, and you're the only one who can tell her." By the time Adrian left Bennett Tower, the Sunday afternoon had turned into a typical New York summer storm. He drove through the rain to Stephanie's apartment, his mind reliving every moment of the last 15 years from a new perspective. Stephanie opened the door, wearing one of her old Columbia t-shirts, her hair pinned up carelessly, and Adrian felt his heart race at the sight. How had he not realized before how perfectly imperfect she was? "Is everything all right?" she asked, noticing his intense expression. In response, Adrian pulled her into a deep kiss, pouring into her all the years of unrecognized love, all the Missed chances all the time they'd wasted dancing around what had always been there. "Your father told me about Southampton," he whispered when they broke apart. "About you, about all those years." Stephanie froze in his arms. "Adrian, Forgive me for taking so long to realize," he continued, "for needing an arranged marriage to finally see what was right in front of me." Tears began to roll down her cheeks. "You have no idea how many times I wanted to tell you, but you seem so happy with Catherine and I didn't want to." "Hey," he dried her tears with his thumbs, "the past doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that we're finally here together. And this time, it's forever." The rain continued to fall outside, but inside the apartment, two hearts that had taken 15 years to find each other finally beat to the same rhythm. The news that the Mitchell-Bennett marriage had turned into a genuine love story ran through Manhattan's social circles with the speed of a hurricane. The photos of the couple in the rain in front of Bennett Tower went viral not for the drama, but for the sheer emotion captured in the moment. Eleanor Mitchell was in her element, turning what would have been an elegant but restrained wedding into a fairy tale event. Stephanie watched with amused resignation as her future mother-in-law and mother discussed increasingly elaborate floral arrangements. "They've completely forgotten that we wanted something intimate," Stephanie commented to Adrian during a rare moment alone in his office. "Let them have their fun," he replied, pulling her onto his lap. "Besides, now that it's no longer just a deal, maybe we deserve a proper celebration." Stephanie's phone vibrated another message from Charlotte about the potluck tea she was organizing. "Appropriate, your mother wants to hire a symphony orchestra." "At least she's given up on the idea of white pigeons," Adrian laughed, kissing her neck. The office door opened abruptly, causing Stephanie to jump off Adrian's lap. Madison entered like a tornado, her normally composed face showing concern. "Catherine is engaged," she announced without preamble. Adrian and Stephanie exchanged glances. "And that's relevant because," Adrian asked, "because she announced that the wedding will be in October, the same weekend you chose." Stephanie felt her stomach turn, not because of the news itself, but because of Catherine's obvious desire to create drama. "She's trying to provoke a reaction," she concluded. "Obviously," Madison agreed. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Adrian stood up, walking over to the window that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. For a moment, Stephanie feared that it might affect him more than he admitted. But when he turned around, there was a smile on his face. "Nothing," he replied simply. "We're not going to do anything at all." "Nothing?" Madison looked skeptical. "Exactly. Catherine wants attention. She wants drama. The best answer is to carry on with our plans as if she didn't exist." Stephanie felt her heart expand with love and pride. This was the man she had fallen in love with so many years ago, strong, secure, impossible to manipulate. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations, dress fittings, and meetings with suppliers. But it was the quiet moments that marked Stephanie the most. Adrian coming home late at night with his favorite Thai kitchen dish, the lazy mornings discussing the renovation of their apartment, the random messages during the day just to say, "I love you." One evening, while they were organizing the last confirmations of attendance, Adrian became strangely quiet. "What are you thinking about?" Stephanie asked, noticing his distant expression. "About how I almost let you get away," he replied, pulling her closer on the sofa. "About how many years we lost because I was too blind to see what was in front of me." "They weren't lost years," she corrected softly. "They were years of growing up. Maybe we needed that time to become the right people for each other." Adrian kissed her, then a deep kiss that spoke of years of contained love and promises of the future. When they parted, his eyes shone with something that made Stephanie's heart leap. "Marry me tomorrow," he said suddenly. "What?" Stephanie laughed. "Adrian, we're getting married in a few weeks." "No, I mean marry me tomorrow at the town hall. Just the two of us, our closest witnesses. The big wedding may go ahead as planned, but I want our moment to be ours alone." Stephanie felt tears forming in her eyes. "Your mother will kill us." Probably, he agreed, laughing. But it's worth the risk. The next morning, with only Madison, Charlotte, and James as witnesses, Adrian and Stephanie exchanged votes at Manhattan City Hall. She wore a simple, white dress she had bought for a charity dinner. He was in his favorite navy suit. There was no symphony orchestra, elaborate arrangements, or VIP guest list. "I promise to love you not because it's convenient or because it makes sense," Adrian said, his voice breaking, "but because my heart knows no other way. I promise to love you not because I've waited 15 years for this moment," Stephanie replied through tears, "but because I intend to spend the next 50 loving you even more." When the judge declared them man and wife, the small town hall burst into applause and tears. Madison filmed everything with her cell phone, probably anticipating Eleanor's reaction when she found out. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charlotte announced as they left for the celebratory lunch at Le Bernardin, "I present to you the newest Mitchell-Bennett couple, who have proved that sometimes it takes an arranged marriage to realize that true love was there all along." October arrived with a burst of autumn colors and the promise of new beginnings. The day of the Mitchell-Bennett's official wedding dawned with a perfectly blue sky over Manhattan, as if even nature wanted to celebrate the union that had already taken place discreetly weeks before. At the St. Regis Hotel where the bride was getting ready, the news of the secret wedding at City Hall had become something of a romantic legend among the guests. Eleanor Mitchell, after her initial indignation, ended up admitting that there was something incredibly romantic about the idea. "I still can't believe you guys did that," Charlotte commented as she helped Stephanie into her Vera Wang dress. "That was the most anti-Stephanie thing I've ever seen you do." "Maybe the old Stephanie," she replied, looking at her reflection in the mirror. "The new Stephanie does crazy things for love." The dress was a masterpiece of elegant simplicity, Italian silk that flowed like water with delicate French lace details on the shoulders. But it was the sparkle in Stephanie's eyes that really completed the look. Patricia Bennett entered the room and immediately brought her hands to her face in emotion. "Oh, darling." "No tears, Mom," Stephanie warned, although her own eyes were watering. "Charlotte's just done my makeup." "I can't help it." Patricia approached, adjusting a loose strand of her daughter's hair. "Did you know your father cried when I told him about the wedding at the town hall?" Stephanie turned around in surprise. "Dad, crying?" "He said he was proud of you for following your heart. After so many years of guarding your feelings for Adrian, you finally had the courage to say what you wanted." Across the hotel, Adrian was adjusting his tie for the 10th time while James tried to calm him down. "You're already married to her man," his brother-in-law reminded him. "This is just the celebration." "It's different," Adrian insisted. "Today is about showing the whole world that she's my choice, my destiny." Madison entered the room carrying a small box. "Last-minute present from the bride," she announced, handing it to her brother. Inside was a vintage Patek Philippe watch, the same model Adrian had admired in an antique store in Southampton 15 years ago when they were just teenagers spending the summer together. Like her. He began moved. Apparently, she never forgot. Madison smiled. "There's a note." Adrian opened the small card in Stephanie's elegant handwriting. "To mark all the moments we'll still live together. I love you always forever. S." The Plaza Hotel had been transformed into an autumn fairy tale setting with elaborate flower arrangements in shades of burgundy and gold. The decision to stick to the original wedding date, even with Catherine's attempted provocation, had proved to be the right one. She ended up changing her own plans for Las Vegas at the last minute. When the ballroom doors opened and Stephanie began her walk down the aisle to the sound of an orchestral version of "Can't Help Falling in Love," Adrian felt his heart stop. Even though she was already officially his wife, seeing her walk towards him, a radiant smile lighting up her face made all the air leave his lungs. The vows this time were different from those pronounced at the town hall, a public celebration of the love they had kept secret for so long. "When we were 15, Adrian began, his voice steady despite the emotion. You told me that you believed some people were meant for each other. I laughed and said that destiny was for fairy tales. Today, I admit I was wrong. You are my destiny, Stephanie. You always have been." Silent tears streamed down Stephanie's face when it was her turn. "For 15 years, I kept a secret that everyone seemed to know that my heart belonged to you. Now it's no longer a secret, and I promise to spend the rest of our lives showing you how much I love you every day in every little moment." The reception that followed was everything Eleanor and Patricia had dreamed of, elegant, emotional, and absolutely perfect. But it was the quiet moments between the dances that meant the most to the bride and groom, the glances exchanged across the room, the complicit smiles, the discreet touches that said more than 1,000 words. During the first dance to the sound of Etta James At Last, Adrian pulled Stephanie closer. "Glad we did it twice," he whispered in her ear. "Glad we found each other even if it took an arranged marriage to make it happen," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. Later, when the party was in full swing, they slipped out onto the terrace of the plaza. The city sparkled under the October night sky, and a gentle breeze carried the last notes of the music playing inside the hall. "You know what's funny?" Stephanie commented as Adrian wrapped her in his embrace. "For years, I've tried to imagine what this moment would be like, but reality is infinitely better than any dream." "Because it's real," he replied, kissing her forehead. "Because we're finally being true to each other and to ourselves." The sound of glasses clinking in the hall brought them back to reality. It was time for the final toast, the goodbyes, the official start of their life together. Even though in their hearts that life had already begun a long time ago on a summer afternoon in Southampton, when a 16-year-old girl fell in love with a boy who would take her 15 years to realize that his destiny had been there all along. "Ready to go?" Adrian asked, offering his hand. Stephanie entwined her fingers in his, the wedding ring sparkling under the Manhattan lights. "With you, always." And so, under the starry New York sky, two hearts that fate had entwined long, before any agreement or arrangement began their forever, not because it was convenient, not because it made sense, but because some love stories are written in the stars just waiting for the right moment to be told.